Play is such an important aspect of learning for children and adolescents. So, what is it like to implement play therapy with South Asian adolescent clients when, at times, there may be some cultural expectations about whether activities can lead towards success or not? Additionally, when exploring grief with adolescent South Asian Muslim clients, what might be an important consideration when recommendations are made to help express that grief? Welcome to People of Color in Psychology, the show that explores mental health topics specific to culture, diversity, and communities of color. I am your host, Jack Sen. Today on our podcast, we have the pleasure of welcoming Aliyah Fazal, a licensed professional counseling associate who works with adolescents and adult populations. With a master's in professional counseling from Southern Methodist University and a bachelor's in neuroscience and psychology from the University of Texas at Dallas, Aliyah possesses a deep understanding of how trauma impacts the brain and body, enabling her to guide clients towards healing and growth. Aliyah brings a unique perspective to her work, understanding the impact of cultural identity on mental health. She utilizes a holistic approach, integrating neuroscience, expressive arts, and evidence-based practices to help clients navigate a wide range of challenges, including depression, anxiety, trauma, and relational issues. As a Pakistani American with a Muslim background, Aliyah will be sharing with us her experience in working with adolescent South Asian clients and things to consider in a clinical practice space. Aliyah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm excited to be here.
We're really excited to have you here because we actually have not had a lot of conversations about doing therapy with adolescent populations, and more specifically with South Asian clients. Tell me a little bit more about your work right now.
Yeah. So right now, I see a wide variety of ages, of course, but my focus or kind of my area of passion has been adolescence the more that I've been practicing, just because it's such a sensitive age group and they're going through, so many changes and such a small period of time. And so I think as I've started practicing, and it's a common feature when you're an associate, is kind of finding your groove and finding things that you really resonate with. And so it kind of took me by surprise that children and adolescents were going to be something that I focused on, but the more that I work with them, the more joy that I have in my work. So it's been really, really great to find out.
So in many ways, it's a surprise for you.
Yeah. I think a lot of programs too, when you initially approach counseling, do focus on adults and young adults, just because that's the nature of most people that do approach counseling. So children and adolescents are sometimes, I don't want to say underserved, but not as thought of when you initially think of counseling. And so when I entered counseling, initially thinking, okay, most of my population was going to be young adults and adults, that's why it kind of surprised me that I took to children and adolescents afterwards.
Yeah. And when we say young adults, we're talking about college age, and then, of course, adolescents. And because terminology, I think over the years, has become more emerging adults, and then young adults, and then there's also now adolescents. And
For sure.
now you're talking about the passion in working with South Asian adolescents. And we know just through and through several episodes and, being AAPI myself, just in general, adolescent AAPI clients rarely, or at least it's changing now, rarely seek the therapy. So I'm curious, just from your experience since you're working with this population, what's standing out for you?
You're right for sure that initially, like South Asian and AAPI adolescents or even children, weren't as keen on coming in. Their parents or caregivers or, family members just weren't aware that that was something that they could do, I'd say. With, like you mentioned, emerging adults, which for sure can be anywhere between 18 to 35, that population, as they're growing older, I think have more agency to be able to say, I want to go in for counseling. and so have that autonomy to seek it out, especially because at that point they're considered like legal adults. So they can approach counseling individually without needing that help. When you're a minor, those decisions are made for you. So I think for this population, it's becoming more acceptable for parents to bring their children and adolescents in and realize that there is help for that age range, where I think traditionally it just wasn't considered even an option.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, with colleges too, you have the university or college counseling centers that are available
Mhm.
for students. But uh, in high school, middle school, yes, you have school psychologists. However, oh gosh, you're responsible for a lot of kiddos. And so it is
Yeah.
very difficult to have that sustained, ongoing therapeutic relationship. So, tell me a little bit more about working with this population, things to consider clinically.
Yeah, yeah. When I was in grad school and preparing to become a counselor, when I did take the expressive arts and, play therapy specialized courses, there was a focus on utilizing play as a child's language. That's how they communicate. It's harder for kids and adolescents to feel comfortable having a one-on-one conversation where they just kind of explain everything or are able to even from a cognitive standpoint, reflect on, okay, why am I feeling this way? Or take something that I might say. And so in the clinical space, I've found that even just keeping busy with like a fidget toy or playing a game of Uno that distracts their minds. And so it's almost easier to communicate through just play or activity rather than having that intense one-on-one conversation that they, for whatever reason, it's harder to access what we're trying to access in therapy. So I found that really interesting as I've been going through my coursework, but specifically in South Asian populations too. They bring a host of different contexts and backgrounds to be aware of when you're in the play space for sure.
So, can you give me examples like what that might entail when you're talking about the background and the context for South Asian adolescent?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, and this is, of course, from my experience in the playroom or in the therapy space, I should say. I know there's not quite a lot of research, of course, when it comes to the effectiveness of play therapy or activity therapy for South Asian clients. So what I found just in my practice is a lot of it is kind of just becoming comfortable with allowing yourself to play or allowing your time to be spent in a way that's not having to be inherently productive in a traditional sense. A lot of clients that I see, they're a lot of people that come to counseling, a lot of children, adolescents, they're in school. And so their main focus is school performance. That's their, quote unquote job, just like we're at our jobs. Their job is to go to school and to learn and then to come home and then they have homework. That's their priority, the pressing issues for them. And then school relationships. You're at school 8 hours a day. The people that are around you, make or break that experience. And so oftentimes what I'll get is some resistance initially, and not because they don't enjoy, sitting with someone and getting to like draw or create or play, but it's really just, I have so many other things on my mind. Like this is the least of my worries right now. And so I think I've started to learn that before we can even get into any therapeutic work, I have to get them comfortable with just, hey, this is an hour of your time that you get to do, you have control. You get to do whatever you want in this space. And if we need to take maybe 5-10 minutes to plan your homework out when you get home, or even talk about, what about your homework is bothering you or stressing you out and come up with ways to help you study your material in the future, basically just acknowledging that therapy might not be your priority right now. And I think once I acknowledge that almost elephant in the room where they don't want to tell them, but once I put that in front of them and really allow them to share that with me and understand and relate to that level, they start to be more open to the process because they know I'm not just ignoring their priorities, right? I'm keeping their priorities in mind, but I'm also trying to make sessions useful for them, which I found at first kind of difficult to do, but really effective with understanding and getting to kids' levels.
Yeah. I would imagine it is difficult when many people are thinking about, well, in therapy, I need to do therapeutic work. I need
Hmm.
to be doing an intervention. I need to see the outcome as opposed to sitting back and say, wait a second, I need to even just be willing to let go of the concept of therapeutic for the child may be different than what I think is therapeutic in general. Can you tell me, just from your experience, what are they coming in for? What sort of concerns are they bringing up?
Yeah, yeah. I think this is another thing to kind of consider, or that I have learned to consider in the clinical space with South Asians specifically. You have the concerns that parents and caregivers and family will bring in, and then the concerns that children and adolescents bring in themselves. And sometimes they are aligned. Family understands that their kid is struggling with anxiety or school performance or friendships. And the kid can also acknowledge, like, yeah, that's what I'm dealing with. That's what I'm working with. But oftentimes it's kind of, I don't want to say opposing issues, but what parents will maybe perceive as the issue will be really different from what the child or the adolescent will bring up in the room. Maybe the underlying, or I should say, the overt presentation of what they're coming in with is anxiety. Or a lot of times, as I mentioned earlier, the first thing they're noticing is school performance going down. And I think that's why I've come to realize it's so important to acknowledge that, because there's always pressures. I think South Asian clients come in with school pressures and performance, and knowing that that's a value coming from the culture is to be high performing and to be, when it comes to school and professional development. And they don't really, or parents kind of undervalue the other aspects of their lives, like their friendships that are blossoming, or their identity that is blossoming, or, as I've mentioned, the inherent productivity of allowing a child to play and allowing a child to use that as a means for stress relief. I think when it comes to play, it's viewed as unproductive. And so anything that's not school or not inherently modeling those values isn't worth it. And so even reshaping what parents think about clients coming to therapy, and specifically play therapy, is super important to get them feeling comfortable and on board with what I'm doing in session. Because I can see from an outside's perspective, it's like, I'm bringing my child to play card games with you. What's the value in that? How is that going to get their grades up? And then the more I talk to the adolescent or child, they're like, yeah, I feel this pressure and this kid's not talking to me and I feel sad and I don't know what to do with all of these, oftentimes new emotions that they don't even know how to express, or what they're feeling, or what does this mean for them. So I think that's been a unique challenge that's been posed, that I'm always trying to acknowledge and also figure out, is how can I both help parents understand what their child really needs and what they're struggling with, and also, understand the child's view of their own problem, because oftentimes they're not quite aligned. And so it's hard to be able to work in that space when both parties aren't feeling heard.
What you're saying here is the child and the adolescent, they're clear about what they're struggling with.
Mhm.
At the same token, they may find it difficult to communicate or express that to you since it may not have been expressed to others around them. The part that I think you are also pointing out is that you must also work with the family, which often is the case with working with adolescent client or adolescent populations.
Mhm.
You've also mentioned understanding the value of achievement, specifically academic career achievement. How do you have those conversations with parents? Because, yes, you're talking about working with adolescent South Asian clients. Can you give me an example of the conversations that you're having?
Yeah, yeah. With parents, I think this leans into the broader topic of cultural influences in general and what kind of generational gap exists between what they value and what, is I understand that parents want their kids to succeed and want their kids to thrive in the school space and set them up for future success. And I know that traditionally in our culture, there is this emphasis on, as you mentioned, achievement. And I think I just help them understand that achievement looks like different things. Like achievement can look like a variety of different things. Achieving healthy friendships, that's something that can also set them up for success long down the road when it comes down to networking or it comes down to having a good support system. Identity work, being able to have a strong sense of self, achieving that may not look like something you can easily point to on paper. But when it comes to be able to embody your values or know who you are in times of distress, is also a form of achievement and something that will help them down the road. So I think I try to reframe a lot of what looks like, or I should say, doesn't look like traditional senses of achievement into something that they can understand will still benefit their child long after therapy is over. And just kind of reestablish that, yes, absolutely, we don't want to undermine school and the importance of that performance, but we also don't want to make it the absolute center of their child's world.
Yeah, you don't want to make it the only thing, so
Mhm.
limited in scope. Can you give me some specific examples of either cultural adaptations or things that people need to pay attention to when working with adolescent South Asian clients who may identify as Muslim?
Yeah, yeah. One specific thing comes to mind when you ask that. When I was in grad school, we were talking about specifically grief as it comes for children and adolescents. And as we know, grief touches everyone, but it's especially difficult for children to understand and wrap their heads around. And we know how to handle grief as adults, being able to just cognitively and developmentally process it. But as we've stated, kids are not in that realm yet or don't have all the tools for it. So when I was in school, we were doing this exercise where you create an altar, to honor anyone who has passed on or any form of grief that you were going through. And I remember feeling conflicted because while that is absolutely a very normal and culturally relevant way to honor grief and honor those who have passed on in other cultures, as a Muslim, we are not allowed to create altars to honor our loved ones. We have other practices that we do in order to do so. So I brought it up to my professor and we had a great talk about it, and she was so encouraging and helped me amend the project to be able to use it with Muslim clients in the form of like scrapbooking or in the form of journaling or making kind of like a newspaper spread and projecting that grief in that way and using it creatively. And I thanked her for being able to be flexible in that way. And it really taught me there are ways to be able to be culturally competent, especially with Muslim clients. And it felt really great for me to be able to actually do the exercise myself and practice what I would be using with adolescents. And one thing I appreciated about her as well is, she not only amended the project for me to be able to use in my future practice, but she also invited me to share with the class why I was amending it. And so I was really appreciative that she took the extra step. Not only was she like, okay, I'll let you handle this in the way that's respectful for you, but why don't you share with the rest of the class why you're doing this and what the meaning is? So if they work with Muslim clients, they'll be able to utilize this as well if they sense any sort of discomfort. And so, yeah, it was a great learning moment, not only for me, but for the rest of my class, because I could share, this is why Muslims might feel uncomfortable with this because it brushes up against their values. And if it does for anybody, but especially for Muslim clients, how can we not just reject the idea entirely, but how can we use it in a way that's still therapeutic and still brings the processing and normalization of grief but in a way that they can utilize it and not feel like it's rubbing up against their religious values. So I thought that was amazing, and I've used it once with one of my clients, and it was super transformative.
Wow. Wow. That's such a powerful example of several things. One, culturally adapting interventions. Two, for you to have spoken up. Because if you hid
Mhm.
in the veil of, I should not discuss this because I've gone through years of microaggression, years of backlash for speaking up about my identity. I
Mhm.
don't think other students would have learned about this idea, nor would you have been able to learn and practice it with your future client.
Yeah, yeah, no, I was really thankful for being able to have just that inner sense of like, "No, you should really talk about this, and you should bring this up, because if it's important to you, it's gonna be important to somebody else." So I'm very thankful for my professor for encouraging me to not only do this for myself, but to be able to share with other people, and I think that just reinforced the value that I had, which is using my voice and not feeling so ashamed or pushing it to the side.
How did you come to doing this type of work? Share with us any memorable events or circumstances that influenced how you got here.
Yeah, I was thinking about this a lot recently, and I think when I initially realized I wanted to become a therapist, I almost did it, and this is gonna sound funny, out of spite.
Oh,
I know, I know, that sounds kinda
spite towards
crazy.
whom?
It's right, exactly. Spite, I say that in the sense that spite towards the box that I felt like I was being put in at the time. Growing up, a lot of my peers and the community really focused on the big 3, which is doctor, lawyer, engineer. You are one of those 3, and that's it. And, I resented that. I just thought I can be other things, and I really wanted to be other things. So, growing up around that messaging was really difficult because I knew that I had interests in different fields, not just psychology and neurology, but other artistic fields too. And so it was really difficult wanting to and knowing that I wanted to be in a field that could nicely marry all of those things together. And then also, I didn't want to be put in a box. And I understand that our brains are so hardwired to do that and to categorize and be able to label things. And my adolescent self was just not about it. And so I think as I was, thinking about my career and thinking about what I wanted to do, when I found therapy, it really just resonated with me. And it was also a way for me to kind of bridge the gap between still doing kind of one of the big 3 in the sense that I was in healthcare or in the, health field, but still doing it my way. And so it is funny, thinking back that, my angsty adolescent self really just wanted to do something out of the norm. But, as an adult, I feel like it's kind of was my act of resistance that I really just wanted to be able to embody what it looks like to be both American and Pakistani and South Asian, and honor, both what people wanted for me and what my family and my friends wanted for me, but also being able to kind of do it my own way.
Wow. Wow. To express all these elements of your identities in a way that makes sense for you, in a way that fuels you, in a way where it feels like you're thriving as opposed to being confined. And like you
Yeah,
said, the tendency for society, culture to categorize and box us in into a
yeah.
certain, yeah, yeah. Well, and I know now this question here says in your career as a person of color. So we're actually going to change that just a little bit in terms of rather doesn't have to be career. Okay.
Mm,
Um, and I say this because you're still early career, so we don't want to.
mhm.
We just want to make it flexible.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
as a person of color, what were some challenges that you faced and overcame that you would be willing to share?
Yeah, yeah. Um, and I think a lot of South Asians and even, just people of color in general have said this over years, which just something that I found that happened quite a lot to me was, as I mentioned, kind of that box or that labeling um, that was happening. And as we know, I am not a big fan of that. So anytime I would brush up against that, it really angered me. It caused a lot of pain, kind of as I was navigating myself as a South Asian. And so, for example, a lot of people, they'll categorize South Asians as, one population, but there are hundreds of languages, tens of religions. There's so many different cultures. And for me, I know I would share my background and I would often find people kind of glazed over, not really listening. They're like, "Oh, okay, you're from there, fine. Like that's I don't want to hear anymore. I kind of know where to put you." And even, so as you mentioned, I'm Muslim and we practice Ramadan once a year, which is a month-long fast for people who aren't aware. And it's basically just a time where we fast and we focus on prayer and spirituality and charity. And so growing up, and even as an adult, which I was kind of taken aback by, people would ask me about Ramadan and I'd be so excited to share because I'm like, this is a huge part of my faith and a huge part of my identity and something that I genuinely spiritually practice and enjoy. And the language around it really bothered me. They'd be like, "Oh, you're starving." And, "I can't believe they don't let you drink water. And I can't believe they make you do that." And it was kind of this disgust almost. And I felt really defensive. I was like, "No, I'm doing this because I want to." I think those specific instances really stuck with me because I felt like I couldn't share freely about things that were important to me without having to almost defend myself and look like this very perfect image of what a Pakistani Muslim has to look like in order to seem palatable. And it was really tough.
Those are explicit examples of microaggression and Islamophobia. It's like
Hmm.
you can't or we shouldn't be practicing Islam. Oh gosh, right? This aversive reaction as opposed to, oh wow, tell me about, what you have gained spiritually going through this practice. Someone who's
Yeah.
leaning and curious about that. Yeah.
Hmm.
And then
Yeah.
and having to defend yourself and answer those questions, gosh, that's tiring because it's every year.
And I think you nailed it in the sense that it was the lack of curiosity for curiosity's sake that I think really got to me. It wasn't, like you said, this sort of like, "Oh, tell me more about this." It was kind of this preconceived, like, "Oh, you're not allowed to do this." Well, that fits the stereotype that I know about Muslims. So that checks out. So anything I said in defense of it felt like it fell on deaf ears. And so that part was really, really, really challenging and difficult growing up.
Hmm. How have you overcome it?
I think it took a long time. It took a long time to be able to feel comfortable in both, having one foot in the space of being growing up in America and one foot in my culture and my background and history as being a Pakistani Muslim. I have my support system, my friends and family, and my professors to thank for giving me the confidence in the voice that I bring. I think it was easy growing up trying to kind of blend in. And, the more reactions that I got, the more I tried to minimize it and was like, "Oh, okay, maybe I just won't bring this up anymore because if people don't want to hear it, I don't want to say it. And I certainly don't want to other myself." But as I grew older, I think I just learned to have confidence in who I was and the unique nature that my upbringing has brought me, especially when it comes to bridging that generational divide and being able to speak both languages of Eastern and Western culture. And so it's finally become a strength for me to be able to relate to people and also explain things in a way that both parties can understand. And so that's been really helpful in me being able to kind of overcome that initial fear of sharing with people.
What does it mean for you to be a Pakistani American therapist?
For me, it kind of embodies that value of resistance, or um, just that feeling that I don't have to be limited in what I do. And I certainly don't have to fit into one place or another. Like, I have a lot of values that I hold from being American, and I have a lot of values that I hold from being Pakistani. And so being able to honor the good and the bad that comes with both of those, and being able to pick and choose what I feel like best makes me me, is really what I feel like fuels the pride that I have in my identity.
This continuous effort and essentially practicing the way that you see is important for you as well as your community. Because, like you
Mhm.
said, to be able to speak different language, to communicate back and forth, you essentially are reaching out to basically reaching out to populations and clients who otherwise may feel uncomfortable seeking therapy, sending their teenage son or daughter to therapy, and then for you to be able to create that space in a way that resonates and connects. So, Alia, how can we support you?
I really just want to be a resource and be someone. I mean, I love to collaborate. So if anybody would like to learn more information on how to work with this population, especially with kiddos and adolescents, feel free to reach out to me. My information will most likely be in the description, I'm sure, or just to connect, because I think one of the best things about our culture is the familial support that we all share with each other, and the shared experience and the lived experience that we all get to have. And so, yeah, being able to kind of help each other through this field and feel more empowered to move through this field with our backgrounds instead of feeling like we're kind of isolated. Absolutely. Yeah. I would just love to support anybody who's doing this work and keep encouraging them to do so.
Fantastic. Definitely, if folks are interested in working with adolescents with South Asian population or play therapy, please definitely reach out to Aliyah, and we'll have your contact information on our show notes. Aliyah, thank you so much for being on our show today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I had a blast.
A huge thank you to our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please share and subscribe to People of Color in Psychology. You can also support us by registering for continuing education courses or making a one-time donation on the Multicultural Counseling Institute's website. Your feedback is important to us, so feel free to send an email, a message on LinkedIn, or leave a voice message on our website. Until next time, this is your host, Jack Sun.